When Isaac Bashevis Singer was asked, "Do you believe in free will?" he answered, "Do I have a choice?" Singer tells the story of a man in his grandfather's shtetl. Everyone referred to the man as the fatalist. When everyone else was busying himself with Torah study, the fatalist hung a sign on his door saying, "Lessons in German." He often boasted about his vast knowledge in German philosophy, preaching that everything is fixed and determined. He caught the most grief from a woman named Freda. Freda loved to tease him. One day she asked, "Are you such a fatalist that you would lie down across the railroad tracks just to prove your point?" And the fatalist said, "Yes, I would. And not only that, but I am such a fatalist that I would lie down on those tracks, and if I should survive, I would take it as a sign that I should marry you." And Freda accepted what seemed to be a strange proposal. That night, the fatalist walked to the outskirts of the shtetl, where the train went by, and he held a ketubah in one hand and a chuppah in the other, just in case. Meanwhile, the word had spread, and everyone gathered around the tracks in excitement. When the driver of the train saw the crowd up ahead, he slammed on the brakes and came to a screeching halt, just inches away from the neck of the fatalist. Everyone was amazed. And the fatalist picked himself up, brushed himself off, took his place under the chuppah, signed the ketubah, and they were married. Singer tells that years later, his grandfather saw the fatalist on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and he asked him, "Would you do it again? Are you still such a fatalist that you would go down to Penn Station and lay yourself down on the tracks?" And the fatalist said, "Yes, yes I would. But this time, I wouldn't marry Freda." So, I am in the middle of teaching a 6-part course entitled Faith in Crisis. It's team taught with the faculty of the Hartman Institute, and there are about, 30 of us who gather in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon to talk about these themes. What is fixed? What is determined? What is within our control? What is God's will? What is our will? How and when do they converge, if ever? This week's Torah portion tells the story of matchmaking. And in Jewish tradition, we believe that God's hand has something to do with the matchmaking business, or so it is taught. We refer to our life partner as our besheret, our fated one, the one that God had selected for us long ago, perhaps even before we were born. And some believe, the Hollywood screenwriters certainly promote the belief, that a higher power organizes the course of our lives so that we happen upon one another at just the right moment, just with a glance, and discover the love in the eyes of the other. God is the shadchan, God is the matchmaker on high, who gets it right every time, except, of course, when it isn't right. Sometimes it isn't right at all. This week's Torah portion tells how the match is made between Isaac and Rebekah, just under the surface of that question, who chooses? Who chooses? And in the parsha, there are 2 theologies woven together. Abraham's servant, Eliezer, represents the belief that God determines the fate of humanity. And Rebekah represents the belief that human power chooses the course of our own lives. If they were asked, as Isaac Bashevis Singer was asked, "Do you believe in free will?" Eliezer would answer, "I am my master's loyal servant." And Rebekah would answer, "I am the master of my own destiny." We see that Eliezer watches and waits for signs from God. and is directed by his interpretation of those signs. Rebecca, on the other hand, is constantly on the move, constantly on the lookout. She creates her own reality. She draws the water from the well. And when she is asked, actually, she isn't asked. When she is told how things will unfold in time, be patient, she says one word, Elech, I will go. And she goes at once. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory, whose first yahrzeit is observed this week, writes the following in his book, To Heal a Fractured World. We are changed not by what we receive, but by what we do. A Marxist critique of religion is that religion makes us passive, not active, dependent, not independent. Religion leads us to accept the world as it is, not to change it to what it ought to become. On the face of it, this could ring true. On the surface, one could find in the Torah God's saving acts, miraculous interventions, the rescue missions by God who descends from heaven to change the circumstances here on earth. The Torah can be read for evidence of God's power. If God wills it, it will come to be, and if not, not. The message one might take away from such a reading could be, pray and be patient as history is shaped by God's hand. But this is only a partial and therefore a very dangerous reading of the Torah. Chapter after chapter of our holy book teaches that the lives of individuals and families and tribes and all of humanity are shaped not by what is received by God on high, but by what is initiated by human beings of flesh and blood. Some extraordinary people and some quite ordinary people who see themselves as partners with the divine. God creates and controls, but God also enables and empowers. There is what the 16th century Kabbalist Isaac Luria calls tzimtzum, that God contracts to make room for us in the world, to make room for our own free will. God is the main actor, the senior partner, the parent who steps back to make room for others to shine, to advance, to grow, to contribute. God begins and sets the world into motion and then asks us to complete the task. In Pirkei Avot it is written, make God's will your will, and then God will make your will God's own will. The goal of free will is to steer the course of our lives so that we want what God wants. We want for ourselves what God wants for ourselves. We want for the world what God wants for the world. The fusing of the human and the divine wills, that is the goal. Ken yehi ratzon. So may it be God's will, and may it be ours as well.